Hey folks, imagine you're at a family movie night and the dialogue just sounds like it's coming from a tin can, or the action scenes feel flat because the sound just isn't wrapping around the room. I've been there, and before I spent a decent chunk of cash on a home theater upgrade, I wanted to make sure the system I was eyeing actually solved those headaches. The Fluance signature HiFi surround sound 5.0 system caught my attention because it promises a full range, timbre-matched set that looks as good as it sounds. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's talk about the real challenge of putting together a 5-speaker surround set. Most people start with a couple of bookshelf speakers for the front left and right, maybe toss a cheap center channel on a shelf, and hope the rear surrounds somehow fit into the mix. The problem is that mismatched drivers and cabinet designs create gaps in the soundstage, making dialogue sound distant and the ambience feel disjointed. That's why Fluance markets this kit as a perfectly timbre-matched family. The 3-way tower speakers, a dedicated center, and 2 rear surrounds are all built to the same acoustic philosophy, which should keep the tonal balance consistent across the whole room. What I love about the tower speakers is the way they handle the low frequencies. The 8-inch woofers are said to have optimal linear movement, which translates in plain speak to tighter, more controlled bass. In my own living room, which has a fairly standard carpet and a few hardwood floors, the bass didn't balloon into a boomy mess. Instead, it stayed grounded and gave enough punch for action movies without shaking the pictures off the wall. The mid-range dome is another design quirk that actually matters. It points the sound directly toward the listening area, which helps dialogue stay clear even when the on-screen actors are whispering. Now, the center channel is often the unsung hero of a home theater system. Most people overlook it because they assume any speaker can do the job, but the center handles most of the spoken word. Fluance Center uses the same mid-range dome technology, so the voice stays anchored to the screen, reducing that off-axis effect where the actors sound like they're coming from a different spot than the picture. In practice, I noticed that when I watched a dialogue-heavy drama, the lines were crisp and stayed in sync with the actors, which made the experience far less taxing on my ears. The rear surround speakers are the third piece of the puzzle. They're smaller than the towers, but the cabinets are made from acoustically inert MDF wood, which means they won't color the sound with unwanted resonance. In a typical 12-foot listening area, the surrounds filled the space with a nice sense of depth without being overly aggressive. I tried them with a sci-fi soundtrack that uses a lot of atmospheric effects. The rear speakers reproduced those effects in a way that made the room feel immersive, yet they never overpowered the front speakers. Who should consider this system? If you're a movie enthusiast who already has a decent AV receiver and wants a cohesive, full-range soundstage without having to hunt for individual speakers that might clash, this kit is a solid match. It also works well for music lovers who appreciate a richer low-end and a clear mid-range. Think of listening to classic rock vinyl where the kick drum and vocals both need space. The natural walnut finish adds a touch of elegance, so if you care about the visual integration of your gear, that's a nice bonus. Who might want to skip it? If you live in a very small apartment where walls are only a few feet away, the 8-inch woofers could feel a bit too big, and you might end up with more bass bleed than you like. Also, if you're already entrenched in a high-end audiophile setup with dedicated subwoofers and carefully calibrated surrounds, the Fluance kit may feel more like a good enough solution rather than a step up. Finally, the price point sits in a middle range, so if you're on a shoestring budget, you could get a pair of decent bookshelf speakers for less, but you'd miss the timbre-matched consistency across 5 speakers. Let's get into the practical strengths. The first is the seamless tonal match across the whole suite. Because all speakers share the same driver design and cabinet materials, you don't hear a sudden shift when the sound moves from the left tower to the right surround. That continuity is something I've only heard from brands that sell complete packages, not from mixing and matching. Second, the bass response from the towers is more controlled than many other speakers in this price bracket. I tried a low-frequency test track and the woofers stayed tight, which is especially useful if you have a carpeted floor that can sometimes absorb bass. Third, the cabinets are built with engineered MDF wood, which keeps unwanted vibrations down. That's why the mids and highs stay clear even when the volume is cranked for a party. On the flip side, there are some practical weaknesses to be